So how do we make sense of ex-ante returns? What do we have to do? And what are the clear indicators for you on an exam? That's exactly what we're going to cover in this question. And we're going to break down every single step to follow in order to make this a quick and efficient, free point for you on your exam. So let's read through the question together. We have the following question in which you need to be able to figure out how you find your returns and your standard deviation of returns. So let's read through it together. You have done a thorough study of the economy and stock X and concluded that 1. The probability of having a boom next year is 20%, the probability of having a stable economy is 55%, and the probability of a recession is 25%. And 2. The price of stock X will be $45 if there's a boom, $25 if the economy is stable, and $15 if there is a recession. What is the expected return on stock X if it is currently selling for $24? And then what is the standard deviation of returns? Now, this question is really interesting for us because they're giving us some clear indicators of what we're expected to do. Now, in this question, we're discussing this concept of doing a study of the economy and then forecasting different scenarios. Now, this should be a clear sign for you because when we forecast the economy, when we build some probabilities, that means that it is evident that we're dealing with ex-ante returns. Therefore, we need to use the following formula, okay? So when we're doing ex-ante returns, I need you to be able to understand that we're going to be able to find the standard deviation and the returns of our portfolio as such. So in order to find your expected return, all that you have to do, and it's pretty straightforward, is the following. You need to find your probability for that specific period times the return you expect for that given scenario, okay? And essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to do the sum of the different probabilities. So obviously they all add up to 100%. So the one being 20%, you times that by its return. The one that's equivalent to 60%, you times that by that return, and so on and so forth. And you'll see exactly how we do that in this question. Now, in order to find your standard deviation or your variance for ex-ante returns, it's very straightforward. And once again, because we're dealing with probabilities and because we're dealing with forecasting, it is evident that we need to use our ex-ante standard deviation formula. And it goes a little bit like this. So your ex-ante standard deviation formula will give you the following. So what you need to do is, once again, the sum of the probability the probability times your R for that specific, so the return of that specific scenario minus the mean, so minus your expected return, power of 2. Then you're going to take that sum all together. You're just going to slap a little square root to it, classic. And that's how you find your data. Now, I'm going to be totally real with you. When I look at these formulas, they don't mean much to me, but it's really important to take a look at them. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to create our different scenarios. We're going to create what we need to look at, okay? So as I said, this question is really cool because it tells you straight up, hey man, we're doing a probability, we're looking at forecasting, we're doing study of what we expect to happen in the future. All these things are very straightforward. All these things mean to us that we need to look at ex-ante, okay? Once again, if we're looking at future events, if we're using probabilities, that means that we need to use our ex-ante consideration, okay? So now with that being said, there's a last thing that we need to cover, a last little nuance here. This nuance that they're only giving you prices, okay? So for example, the price of stock X will be $45 if there's a boom, but its price will also be $25 if there's a stable economy. And on the other hand, it will be $15 if there's a recession. This is really interesting because they're not giving you any sorts of returns, any sorts of percentages or ratios or whatever the case may be. So what you need to be able to understand is that they're also giving you its current price of the stock today. If you look at it right here, it says stock X, if it is currently selling for $24. So they're telling you that stock X is selling for $24 today. Now, what does that mean for us? That means that P0 is equal to $24. And as you can see, I'm using P0. So I want us to look at our capital gain formula. I want us to look at the good old classic P1 minus P0 over P0. And that's how we're going to be able to find the expected return for every single scenarios, okay? That's how we're going to find the expected return for every single scenario. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a little table and we're going to look at how all these things actually match together. Okay, so I went ahead and I created a table for us to get a better feel of what everything kind of looks like and make it more visual for you guys because I really want to be able to help you. Now, this is something that you don't necessarily have to do on an exam. Typically, they're already going to give you a table. They're already going to make it visual for you. It's very rare that it's going to be all text. But now what I want us to be able to understand, if we look at our table all together, we know, okay, just by looking at this, that we have our probabilities, okay? We have our stock price, we have our returns, then we have the three different scenarios provided to us, which is boom, stable, and recession. Why did we separate our data like this? Is because we want to be able to see, well, what will be our return in each of those scenarios, and then, consequently, what will be our expected return for the total scenarios altogether. So what we want to do now is I want you guys to be able to remember this whole idea of P1, okay, P1 minus P0 over P0. That's going to give us our return for a given scenario. So in this case, if we look at the boom scenario, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look at P1 minus P0 over P0. And we're going to do this one together, okay? So P1, obviously, will be our stock price, okay? And P0 will be our current price. So what we have to do is we have to take 45 minus 24 over 24. And that's going to give us our resulting return. And in this case, our resulting return will be of 0.875. Now that's some crazy returns. You almost doubled your money. That's really cool. So now let's look at it again for our stable scenario. And our stable scenario is really cool because it's slightly different. It's telling us that we're going to be putting 25 minus 24 over 24. Okay. Now once again, we used our capital gain formula. We used our return consideration, and we did 25 minus 24 over 24. Think about it. P1 minus P0 over P0. It's always the same name. It's always the same game. So in this case, our return will be equal to 0.04167. Okay, so about 4%. Then the last scenario, really quickly, I wanted to make it super clear between you and I. Super straightforward. If in a recession, our stock price, our P1 is going to be $15, I think we could both agree that you're losing some money, okay? So obviously, our return could not be positive, okay? So just, if you see that on your exam and you get a negative return, don't think that you made a mistake. Maybe it's actually what you need to get, okay? So with that being said, all jokes aside, what we're going to do here is P1 minus P0 over P0. So we're going to do 15 minus 24 over 24. That's going to give us a return that has to be negative, okay, of minus 0.375. So, minus 37.5%. Okay, so now that we have all of this good stuff, what we could do is we could try to find our expected return for the portfolio. Okay, so the expected return for the portfolio, which we're going to call ER, because E for expected, R for return. Essentially, all that we have to do, if you remember our formula at the top of the page, okay, we're going to do our probability times the return, and we're going to do that for every single probabilities, every different scenarios. In this case, we have 3 scenarios, therefore we have 3 different probabilities and 3 different set of returns. Therefore, we're just going to add them up together, okay? So in this case, what we have is going to be, okay, 20% times, in this case, 0.875 plus 55% times 0.04167 plus 25% times minus 0.375. Okay, and that's going to give us that our expected return for our data set, okay, is of 0.1042, i.e. 10.42%. Now, obviously, we took our time here. Obviously, we went slowly. But the idea is that now we know what's our expected return. Now we know what's the mean of our set of returns. So we know that we're able to figure out, well, what will be our standard deviation of returns? Now, once again, we're dealing with ex-ante, okay? Therefore, we have to deal with another consideration to find our standard deviation or a variance, in which is going to allow us to use our probabilities, okay? The reason why I'm saying this is because when we do ex post standard deviations or variance, we're not looking at probabilities. So just take that into consideration. So with that being said, we're going to look at our formula one more time. So now all that you have to do is you have to do your probabilities times your return, okay, minus your expected return squared. And we're going to do that for every single one of these bad boys. And you're going to see how, straightforward it is. And we're going to use a different color just for the jokes of it. So now we're going to have, okay, the following. I think we could all agree that 0.2 is a probability of our first scenario. We could even write it as 20%. It's the same thing. So 20% times. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our expected return. We're going to take our return for that scenario minus our expected return. Okay, and we're going to square that. So we're going to do 0.875 minus 0.1042, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory doesn't fail me. And we're going to do that squared. So that's one set. Now, just to make it super clear to you guys, we're going to do another set. Okay, so now we're looking at 55% for the stable economy. So we have 55%. And now, if I'm not mistaken, it was 0.04167. All right, minus the same value because it's the mean squared. Okay, now we have the last scenario, which I don't have much space, so I'll put it at the bottom right here. If I'm not mistaken, it was 25% for the recession. So there's a probability of 25% that we're going to have a recession. That's no bueno. And now essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take our minus 0.375. So that was our return for that scenario for a recession. We knew that the stock price would be $15. And when we look at our capital gain formula, that gives us a return of about minus 37.5%. So now all that we have to do is take minus 37.5% minus our expected return. So in this case, we have the following, okay? So that's really, really, really good for us. Now we know that this gives us the following value, okay? You could do it step by step, obviously, just to not make this super exhaustive. I'm gonna skip one little step here. So the answer of all this, all this good stuff, all this beautiful stuff is the following. It's gonna give you, if I'm not mistaken, 0.17839. Now, one last thing, by the way, Obviously, that's not our standard deviation. What we just got here, okay, is our variance. Our variance and our standard deviation are slightly different. So you need to be able to square root. You need to square this value. You need to square 17% such that you actually get the standard deviation of your returns. And in this case, all you have to do is this, such that you get following value, 42%, 42.24%. All right? If I'm not mistaken, that is the correct answer. Okay? So what did we do here? What we did is we looked at why our question told us to do some ex-ante returns. We had to look at it from an ex-ante perspective because they told us that we're using probabilities. We are forecasting, we're taking a guess on what will happen in the future. Therefore, it's obvious that we need to look at our probabilities. And once we have our probabilities, it's very easy to look at our formula set and figure out what we need to compute and how we need to compute it. Now, in this case, we had to use our capital gain formula to find our returns because only monetary values were provided to us, nothing else. But it was pretty straightforward. So this is how you answer these questions. This is typically going to be given to you on your exam, so you need to be able to practice this a little bit. And if you need more practice, well, you came to the right place because I have a bunch of different formulas and problems and notes available to you on my website called Ismahelps.com. You can go to ismahelps.com/comp308 if you are from John Molson School of Business, or you could go to ismahelps.com/intro to finance if you're a student from any other school, and I'd be more than happy to offer you my services and help you. So hopefully this helped, and hopefully you're able to do this.